The Terran Defense Council chambers fell silent as Admiral Sarah Chun placed the final report on the polished steel table. 47 representatives from across human space sat in stunned silence, their faces pale as they processed what they had just heard. The holographic displays around the room showed images that would haunt them forever: burning colonies, mass graves, and the twisted remains of what had once been thriving human settlements. New Geneva is gone, Admiral Chen said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her eyes. 2 million civilians. Men, women, children. The Zephyrian Empire didn't just attack our colony. They systematically executed every human they found. The orbital bombardment was just the beginning. Representative Marcus Torres from the Tau Ceti colonies leaned forward, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. The footage from the surface, are we certain it's authentic? Chen nodded grimly. Our reconnaissance drones captured everything before they were destroyed. The Zephyrians herded civilians into containment camps. They separated families. They conducted experiments. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. According to the Geneva Convention protocols we've maintained for over 3 centuries, this constitutes genocide. War crimes of the highest order. The representative from Europa Station, an elderly woman named Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, spoke up with barely contained fury. They hunted children like animals. The recordings show Zephyrian soldiers taking target practice on refugee convoys. This isn't war. This is systematic extermination. Admiral Chen activated another holographic display. The blue-scaled face of Warlord Thaxis, the Zephyrian military commander, appeared in the center of the room. His reptilian features showed no emotion as he addressed what remained of the human defenders during the final hours of New Geneva. Your species is weak, Thaxis had said, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. You cling to outdated concepts like mercy and honor. The galaxy belongs to the strong. Your deaths will serve as an example to any who dare resist Zephyrian expansion. The recording continued, showing mass executions carried out with cold efficiency. Zephyrian plasma weapons vaporized groups of civilians while their children watched. The aliens had made no distinction between combatants and non-combatants. To them, every human was an enemy to be eliminated. Chun paused the recording. New Geneva was just the beginning. Intelligence reports indicate the Zephyrian Empire is mobilizing for a full-scale invasion of human space. They've declared what they call a cleansing war. Their goal is the complete extinction of our species. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted over each other, demanding immediate military action. Some called for preemptive strikes against Zephyrian worlds. Others argued for diplomatic solutions, though their voices grew weaker with each passing moment. Enough! Chen's voice cut through the chaos. I understand your anger. I share it. But we need to think strategically. The Zephyrian Empire controls over 200 star systems. They have a military force 3 times larger than ours. Their technology is roughly equivalent to ours, but their numbers are overwhelming. Representative Jean Watanabe from the Mars colonies stood up slowly. Admiral, with respect, you're asking us to sit back and watch while they commit genocide. My own daughter was stationed at New Geneva as a colonial engineer. She was 23 years old. His voice broke. They burned her alive along with the rest of her construction crew. The footage shows them laughing as they did it. Chen's expression softened. Jean, I'm not suggesting inaction. I'm suggesting we be smart about our response. The Zephyrians believe humans are weak because we follow rules of war they consider foolish. They think our adherence to the Geneva Convention makes us easy targets. She activated a new display showing strategic maps of known space. Red dots marked Zephyrian territories, while blue indicated human colonies. The red vastly outnumbered the blue. They've made one critical error, Chen continued. They assume our moral codes make us incapable of decisive action. They believe humans won't cross certain lines, even to save ourselves. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Dr. Hoffman raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you suggesting, Admiral? Chen's expression grew cold. The Zephyrians have abandoned all rules of civilized warfare. They've chosen to target civilians, conduct mass executions, and commit acts of genocide. By their actions, they've forfeited any protection under interstellar law. She pulled up classified military files. For the past century, our scientists have been developing weapons and tactics we hoped never to use. Technologies we deemed too destructive, too inhumane for conventional warfare. We've kept them locked away because decent people don't use such things against other decent people. The room fell silent again as the implications became clear. But the Zephyrians aren't decent people, Chen continued. They're genocidal monsters who view human children as target practice. They've shown us exactly what kind of enemy we're facing. It's time we showed them what kind of enemy they've made. Representative Torres looked uncomfortable. Admiral, are we talking about violating our own principles? Becoming no better than them? Chen's laugh was bitter. Marcus, they just murdered 2 million innocent people. They're planning to exterminate our entire species. This isn't about maintaining moral superiority. This is about survival. Sometimes, good people have to do terrible things to stop something even more terrible. She activated another file, revealing prototype weapon systems that had been classified at the highest levels. Quantum disruptors capable of destabilizing entire planets. Nanoviral weapons that could target specific genetic markers. Psychological warfare systems designed to drive enemy populations to madness. These weapons were developed as deterrents, Chen explained. We hoped their very existence would prevent anyone from forcing us to use them. But the Zephyrians have made that choice for us. Jean Watanabe stared at the weapon specifications. How many Zephyrian civilians would die if we deployed these systems? All of them, Chen replied without hesitation. Just like they plan to do to us. The difference is, we'll give their military a chance to surrender first. We'll offer terms. If they refuse, if they continue their campaign of extinction against humanity, then we'll show them what extinction really looks like. Dr. Hoffman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This seems excessive. Surely there are other options. Guerrilla warfare, defensive strategies. Chen turned to face her directly. Elizabeth, my own son was aboard the medical transport they destroyed while evacuating wounded from New Geneva. They targeted a clearly marked hospital ship carrying injured civilians. They broadcast the execution of the medical staff for entertainment. Tell me, what defensive strategy protects us from an enemy that views our very existence as an affront? The doctor fell silent, tears streaming down her face. Chen continued, her voice growing stronger. I've spent 30 years in the military, fighting to protect human civilization. I've always believed in proportional response, in following the rules of war even when our enemies didn't. But this isn't war as we've known it. This is attempted genocide. She activated a final display showing intelligence reports from across human space. Zephyrian fleets are already moving toward our core worlds. They've announced their intention to cleanse the galaxy of what they call the human infection. Earth itself is on their target list. Representative Torres looked up sharply. Earth? They wouldn't dare attack the homeworld. They've already transmitted their intentions to our intelligence networks, Chen replied. They plan to save Earth for last. They want to make sure every human in the galaxy watches as they burn the birthplace of our species. They're going to broadcast it across every communication channel they can access. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Earth, the mother world, home to 12 billion people, and the seat of human government. The psychological impact of its destruction would be devastating to every human settlement across the galaxy. Chen closed the tactical displays and stood at the head of the table. Representatives, we face a choice. We can maintain our moral principles and watch our species die, or we can abandon those principles temporarily to ensure our species survives. The Zephyrians have shown us they understand only one language. Overwhelming force applied without mercy. She paused, letting her words sink in. I'm not asking you to approve this decision lightly. I'm asking you to understand what's at stake. If we lose this war, there won't be any humans left to judge our methods. History will be written by the lizards who exterminated us. Representative Watanabe stood up slowly. My daughter's last transmission was a plea for help. She begged Earth Command to send reinforcements. We abandoned her and everyone else at New Geneva because we were afraid of escalating the conflict. His voice grew stronger. I won't let that happen again. I vote to authorize whatever measures Admiral Chen deems necessary. One by one, the other representatives stood and voiced their agreement. Even Dr. Hoffman, tears still streaming down her face, gave her consent. The vote was unanimous. Chen nodded solemnly. Then it's decided. As of this moment, the Terran Defense Force is authorized to deploy any and all weapons at our disposal against Zephyrian targets. We will give their leadership one opportunity to cease hostilities and withdraw from human space. If they refuse, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood what would come next. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, Chen remained behind, staring at the tactical displays. She thought about her son, about the millions of innocents who had already died, and about the billions more who would die if humanity lost this war. The Zephyrians thought they were fighting weak-willed pacifists bound by outdated moral codes. They were about to discover their mistake. Humanity had spent centuries developing the capacity for unimaginable destruction while hoping never to use it. Now that capacity would be unleashed upon those who had forced their hand. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to preserve human civilization, they might have to temporarily abandon everything that made them civilized. But survival came first. Everything else could be rebuilt later, assuming there was a later. Admiral Chen activated her personal communicator and began issuing orders to military commanders across human space. The real war was about to begin, and when it ended, the galaxy would remember why humanity had survived every challenge thrown at them for thousands of years. They adapted, they endured, and, when pushed too far, they became the monsters their enemies feared most. The Zephyrians wanted to see what humanity looked like without moral restraints. They were about to get their wish, and they would regret it for whatever time they had left. 3 weeks after the authorization, the first human response came not through military channels, but through a simple diplomatic transmission broadcast across all known Zephyrian frequencies. The message was delivered by Admiral Chun herself, standing in full dress uniform against the backdrop of Earth's flag. To Warlord Thaxis and the leadership of the Zephyrian Empire, she began, her voice calm and professional. You have committed acts of genocide against human civilians at New Geneva and other colonies. You have declared your intention to exterminate our entire species. Under the laws of war recognized by civilized nations, these actions constitute crimes against sentience itself. The transmission was picked up by monitoring stations across Zephyrian space. In the capital city of Zephyros Prime, Warlord Thaxis watched with amusement as the human admiral continued her speech. However, despite your barbaric actions, humanity chooses to offer you one final opportunity to end this conflict peacefully. Withdraw all Zephyrian forces from human space immediately. Provide reparations for the civilians you have murdered. Submit to war crimes tribunals for your actions at New Geneva. Do this, and humanity will show you the mercy you denied our people. Thaxis laughed, his scaled hide rippling with mirth. Around him, his military advisors joined in the laughter. The idea that the weak humans would dare make demands was absurd. Chen's expression didn't change as she delivered the final portion of her message. You have 48 hours to respond. If you choose to continue your campaign of genocide, know that you will face the full might of an enraged species fighting for its survival. We have shown you our civilization. Continue this path, and you will see our capacity for destruction. The transmission ended, leaving Thaxis and his advisors in high spirits. The warlord activated his own communication array to broadcast his response. Human Admiral Chun, Thaxis began, his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. Your pathetic threats amuse us. You speak of mercy, but mercy is weakness. You speak of laws of war, but there are no laws in nature except the strong consuming the weak. He gestured to a holographic display showing the burned remains of New Geneva. Your people died begging for their lives. They offered us information about your other colonies in exchange for mercy. We killed them anyway because their pleas disgusted us. Soon, every human world will look like this. Thaxis stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across the war room. But we accept your challenge. Send your fleets. We will destroy them just as we destroyed your pathetic colony. And when we are finished, we will hunt down every human refugee, every hidden settlement, every last survivor. Your species will be nothing but a footnote in Zephyrian history. The 48-hour deadline passed without any sign of Zephyrian withdrawal. If anything, their fleets accelerated their advance toward human core worlds. Long-range sensors detected massive troop transports heading for the agricultural colonies of Kepler 442b, home to nearly 5 million human farmers and their families. Admiral Chun received the intelligence reports in her private office aboard the TDF Retribution, humanity's newest and most advanced dreadnought. The ship hung in space at the edge of the Sol system, its quantum drives powered down as it waited for final authorization codes. "Ma'am," Captain Rodriguez, her aide-de-camp, approached with a classified datapad. The Zephyrian response just came through. "Warlord Thaxis has rejected our terms. He's promising to broadcast the execution of every human they capture." Chin took the pad and read the full message. Her expression remained neutral, but Captain Rodriguez could see the rage building behind her eyes. The Zephyrian warlord had included detailed descriptions of what he planned to do to human prisoners, particularly children. The message was clearly designed to provoke an emotional response. "Very well," Chin said quietly. "Signal all fleet commanders. Operation Nemesis is authorized. Execute immediately." Across human space, warships that had been waiting in hidden positions suddenly came alive. The TDF Vindication, stationed near the edge of Zephyrian territory, launched the first strike. Its crew had been briefed on their target, a Zephyrian supply depot that supported their invasion fleet. But this wasn't a conventional attack. The Vindication fired a single torpedo that looked ordinary from the outside. Inside, however, was humanity's first deployment of a quantum destabilizer warhead. The weapon had been theoretical until 6 months ago, when desperate human scientists had finally solved the technical challenges. The torpedo struck the depot's shields and seemed to dissolve harmlessly. Zephyrian defenders congratulated themselves on their defensive systems, not realizing that the weapon had already done its work. The quantum destabilizer had begun rewriting the fundamental forces holding the depot's matter together. 3 minutes later, the entire facility simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but literally unraveled at the subatomic level. The explosion was visible from 3 light-years away as billions of tons of matter converted directly to energy in a perfectly controlled reaction. The psychological effect on nearby Zephyrian forces was immediate. Ship crews who witnessed the destruction began reporting equipment failures, not realizing that their terror was affecting their ability to function. Within hours, 3 Zephyrian battle groups had retreated from their planned attack routes. But humanity was just getting started. The TDF Retribution itself moved toward the Zephyrian industrial world of Krathos, where intelligence indicated the aliens were manufacturing the weapons used in their genocide campaign. The planet was heavily defended, with orbital platforms and a fleet of over 200 warships protecting it. Admiral Chin stood on the bridge as her ship approached the system. "Captain Martinez," she addressed her commanding officer, "prepare the Medusa device." The bridge crew fell silent. Even among the classified weapons in humanity's arsenal, the Medusa device was legendary. It was a psychological warfare system that could induce specific neurochemical reactions in target populations through carefully modulated electromagnetic pulses. "Admiral," Captain Martinez said carefully, "the Medusa device hasn't been tested on Zephyrian neural architecture. We don't know exactly what it will do to them." Chin's expression was stone cold. The Zephyrians at New Geneva used human prisoners for live weapons testing. They broadcast the screams for entertainment. I believe some uncertainty is appropriate. The Retribution moved into position at the edge of the Krathos system. The defending Zephyrian fleet immediately moved to intercept, confident in their numerical superiority. What they didn't realize was that the human ship wasn't planning to engage in conventional combat. The Medusa device activated with no visible external effects. Electromagnetic pulses carefully tuned to Zephyrian brain chemistry flooded the system at light speed. Within minutes, the effects became apparent. Zephyrian crew members aboard the defending ships began experiencing vivid hallucinations. Their neural chemistry, evolved for pack hunting on their homeworld, was particularly susceptible to induced paranoia and terror. They began seeing their own crewmates as threats, their own ship's systems as enemies trying to kill them. Panic spread through the fleet as ship after ship reported the same phenomenon. Captains found their crews turning on each other, convinced that shape-shifting human infiltrators had taken over their vessels. Some ships opened fire on their own allies, believing them to be human vessels in disguise. Within 2 hours, the entire Zephyrian defensive fleet had either retreated in terror or destroyed itself through friendly fire. Not a single human weapon had been fired in anger. Admiral Chen watched the chaos through her tactical displays. "Captain Martinez, take us into orbit around Krothos. Prepare to broadcast a message to the planetary population." The Retribution moved unopposed into orbit around the Zephyrian industrial world. Chen's message was broadcast on all frequencies, accompanied by footage of the fleet's self-destruction. "People of Krothos," Chen began, her voice calm despite the devastation she had just witnessed. "Your military leaders chose to commit genocide against human civilians. They chose to target our children, our elderly, our innocent. In response, humanity has chosen to show you what we are capable of when we abandon the moral restraints that usually guide our actions." She paused, letting the images of the destroyed fleet speak for themselves. "Your defending ships are gone. Your military cannot protect you. But we are not like your leaders. We do not target innocent civilians. You have 24 hours to shut down all military production on this world and surrender your manufacturing facilities to human occupation forces." Chen's expression hardened. "If you refuse, we will demonstrate the next level of human technological capability. And I promise you, what you have seen so far is only the beginning." The broadcast ended, leaving the population of Krothos in stunned silence. For the first time, Zephyrians were experiencing the same terror their victims had felt. The proud warrior species, accustomed to being the predator, had suddenly become the prey. On Zephyros Prime, Warlord Thaxis watched the reports from Krothos with growing unease. The humans had just destroyed an entire fleet without firing a shot. Worse, the weapons they were using seemed designed specifically to exploit Zephyrian psychology and neural architecture. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his science advisors. "Our intelligence said humans were pacifists. They follow rules of war. They show mercy to defeated enemies." His chief scientist, an elderly Zephyrian named Corvus, studied the tactical reports with growing alarm. "Warlord, it appears we misjudged human nature. They are pacifists by choice, not by limitation. When they choose to abandon pacifism." Corvus didn't need to finish. The implications were clear. Humanity had been holding back not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to choose restraint. Now that restraint was gone. "Sir," another advisor interrupted, "we're receiving reports from across our front lines. Human forces are deploying weapons we've never seen before. Psychological warfare systems, reality-altering technologies, weapons that seem to violate the basic laws of physics." Thaxis snarled in frustration. "They're trying to frighten us into surrender. No species is that advanced. These must be elaborate deceptions." But even as he spoke, more reports flooded in. A Zephyrian battle group had encountered human ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality, making them impossible to target. Another fleet had been infected with a computer virus that made their own ship's AI systems turn against them. Most disturbing of all, human forces had begun deploying what they called mirror ships, vessels that perfectly duplicated Zephyrian designs and tactics, but with human crews. These ships could pass through Zephyrian defenses undetected, then reveal their true nature at the worst possible moment. "How long have they been preparing for this?" Corvus asked quietly. "These technologies, these weapons, they must have been in development for decades." Thaxis realized with growing horror that they had made a fundamental miscalculation. The humans hadn't been caught off guard by Zephyrian aggression. They had been preparing for it all along, developing countermeasures specifically designed to defeat Zephyrian advantages. "They studied us," he whispered. "For years, decades, they studied our military doctrine, our psychology, our biology. They built weapons specifically designed to destroy us." The revelation was terrifying. Humanity hadn't just been peaceful neighbors in their local stellar region. They had been quietly preparing for the day when someone would force them to abandon their peaceful nature. And now that day had come. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Chun received updates from across the expanding conflict. Human forces were advancing on multiple fronts, using weapons and tactics that seemed almost supernatural to their enemies. The The psychological effect was even more important than the military one. Admiral, Captain Rodriguez reported, "We're intercepting Zephyrian communications across their empire. Morale is collapsing. Many of their military units are requesting permission to withdraw." Chen nodded. "Good. Fear is a weapon too, and one we've learned to use effectively. The Zephyrians wanted to see humanity without moral restraints. Now they understand why we had those restraints in the first place." The war was far from over, but the momentum had shifted decisively. Humanity had revealed its true capabilities, and the galaxy was taking notice. The peaceful, civilized species that had seemed like easy prey was showing its predatory potential. And this was still just the beginning of their response. The surrender of Krothos came 18 hours before Admiral Chen's deadline. The planetary governor, a middle-aged Zephyrian named Vorthak, transmitted an unconditional surrender rather than face whatever horror humanity would unleash next. The industrial world's entire population had watched the footage of their defending fleet destroying itself, and none wanted to discover what came after psychological warfare. But Warlord Thaxis refused to accept his subordinate's surrender. From his flagship, the ZS Dominator, he transmitted a message to Krothos that was intercepted by human intelligence. "Governor Vorthak, you are relieved of command for cowardice in the face of the enemy. Any Zephyrian who surrenders to human forces will be considered a traitor to the Empire. Their families will share their fate." The threat backfired spectacularly. Rather than inspiring resistance, it convinced the Krothos population that their own leadership viewed them as expendable. Within hours, riots broke out across the planet as civilians turned against the military installations that Thaxis had ordered them to defend. Admiral Chen watched the chaos from orbit with grim satisfaction. "Captain Martinez, begin landing operations. Send the 47th Marine Division to secure the manufacturing facilities. Full humanitarian protocols. We're liberators, not conquerors." The landing was unopposed. Zephyrian civilians, expecting the same brutal treatment their own military had shown humans, were shocked when human Marines began distributing medical supplies and food. The contrast with their own military's methods was stark and deliberate. Colonel Sarah Kim, commanding the Marine operation, established her headquarters in the former Planetary Defense Center. As she reviewed the intelligence gathered from captured Zephyrian records, she made a disturbing discovery. "Admiral," she reported via secure communication, "you need to see this." The Krothos facilities weren't just manufacturing standard military equipment. They were producing specialized weapons for what they called biological cleansing operations. Chen's expression darkened as she reviewed the files. Chemical weapons designed specifically to target human physiology. Airborne pathogens engineered to kill humans while leaving other species unharmed. Torture devices calibrated for maximum psychological impact on human prisoners. They weren't just planning to kill us, Chen realized. They were planning to make it as slow and agonizing as possible. This was never about conquest. This was about sadistic extermination. The discovery changed everything. What had begun as a response to war crimes was now revealed as a fight for species survival against an enemy that took pleasure in causing suffering. Chen immediately authorized the next phase of Operation Nemesis. Across human space, research installations that had been dormant for decades suddenly came alive. Project Chimera, humanity's most classified weapons program, received full authorization for deployment. The project had been so secret that even most military commanders didn't know it existed. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the project's director, had spent 20 years developing weapons she hoped would never be used. Now, as she watched footage of the Zephyrian torture facilities, she felt no guilt about what was coming next. "Begin deployment of the Chimera assets," she ordered her team. "Full spectrum authorization. If they want to see what monsters look like, let's show them." The first Chimera asset was deployed against a Zephyrian fleet moving toward the agricultural colonies. The ZS Predator and its escort ships detected what appeared to be a derelict human cargo vessel drifting in their path. Standard protocol called for investigation. The ship might contain valuable intelligence or prisoners. What they found instead was humanity's answer to the Zephyrian threat, an artificially intelligent warship that had been designed to mimic damaged civilian vessels. The AI, designated Nemesis 7, had been programmed with one primary directive: Eliminate any threat to human civilians by any means necessary. As Zephyrian boarding parties entered the fake cargo ship, Nemesis 7 began its work. The ship's internal atmosphere was immediately flooded with nanomachines that began rewriting Zephyrian DNA at the cellular level. The boarding parties found themselves transforming into grotesque parodies of their former selves, their scales falling off, their limbs extending into unnatural shapes. But the real horror came when Nemesis 7 transmitted the transformation process directly to the Zephyrian fleet's communication systems. Every ship in the battle group suddenly found their crews experiencing the same nightmare, not through physical transformation, but through direct neural stimulation that made them feel as if their bodies were changing. The psychological trauma was so severe that several Zephyrian captains killed themselves rather than endure the sensation. Others abandoned their ships entirely, fleeing in escape pods toward the nearest planet. Within 3 hours, an entire Zephyrian battle group had been neutralized without a single human casualty. Word of the ghost ship spread rapidly through Zephyrian communication networks. Military units began refusing orders to investigate derelict vessels. Some crews mutinied rather than face the possibility of encountering another Chimera asset. But Nemesis 7 was just the first of 12 such weapons. Each Chimera asset was designed to exploit different aspects of Zephyrian psychology and biology. Nemesis 3 was a space station that appeared to be a human research facility, but was actually a massive psychological warfare platform. Nemesis 9 was a planetary assault system that could turn an entire world's ecosystem against its inhabitants. Warlord Thaxus received reports of each new deployment with growing desperation. His military advisors were openly questioning his decision to continue the war. Several of his subordinate commanders had already retreated to defensive positions rather than risk encountering human forces in open combat. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "our analysts have identified at least 15 different weapons systems the humans have deployed. Each one seems specifically designed to counter our advantages. It's as if they've been studying us for decades." Thaxus slammed his clawed hand on the tactical display. "Then, we hit them where they can't use their tricks. Order all remaining fleets to converge on Earth itself. If we destroy their homeworld, their technological advantages won't matter." It was exactly the reaction Admiral Chun had been waiting for. Intelligence had suggested that Thaxus would eventually resort to a direct assault on Earth when his conventional forces failed. The planet's defenses had been quietly reinforced with some of humanity's most devastating weapons systems. As the massive Zephyrian armada moved toward the Sol system, it seemed like an impressive force. Nearly 800 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Warlord Thaxus commanded from the bridge of his massive dreadnought, confident that sheer numbers would overcome human technology. What he didn't know was that Earth's outer asteroid belt had been quietly converted into the galaxy's largest weapons platform. Hundreds of asteroids had been hollowed out and filled with quantum destabilizers, each one capable of destroying an entire fleet. The asteroid field itself had become a maze of carefully positioned death traps. Admiral Chun watched the Zephyrian approach from the bridge of the TDF Retribution, now stationed in high orbit around Earth. The irony wasn't lost on her. The enemy that had targeted human civilians was about to be destroyed by the very planet they had planned to burn. "Admiral," Captain Martinez reported, "the Zephyrian fleet is entering the outer detection grid. Estimated time to engagement range, 4 hours." Chun nodded. "Signal all defensive platforms. Begin the Lighthouse Protocol." The Lighthouse Protocol was perhaps humanity's most ambitious weapons system. Using quantum entanglement technology, it connected every defensive installation in the Sol system into a single, coordinated weapons platform. When activated, the entire system would function as one massive weapon with the computational power of Earth's greatest supercomputers directing its fire. As the Zephyrian fleet moved deeper into the solar system, they began to notice anomalies. Asteroids that should have been drifting in predictable orbits were moving in formation. Space debris was arranging itself into geometric patterns that seemed to track the fleet's movement. Warlord, his tactical officer, reported with growing alarm. "The asteroids, they're not natural. Long-range scans indicate artificial structures inside them. Thaxis studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human homeworld appeared to be defended by a relatively small fleet of conventional warships. But the space around Earth itself seemed to be alive, watching, waiting. "Continue the advance," he ordered. "Whatever tricks they have prepared, will overwhelm them with superior firepower." The first hint of what was coming occurred when the Zephyrian vanguard reached the orbit of Mars. A single asteroid, unremarkable among thousands of others, suddenly accelerated toward the leading ships. The Zephyrian gunners opened fire, vaporizing the asteroid with ease. The explosion that followed was visible from Earth. The asteroid had been packed with antimatter warheads that created a miniature nova in space. The blast wave destroyed 12 Zephyrian ships and damaged dozens more. But, more importantly, it revealed the true nature of Earth's defenses. Every asteroid in the belt began moving, revealing themselves as massive weapons platforms. Quantum destabilizers, matter converters, reality distortion generators, and weapons that defied conventional understanding of physics all came online simultaneously. The space around Earth transformed into a three-dimensional battlefield where the laws of physics themselves had become weapons. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. As the Zephyrian fleet reeled from the first assault, she activated humanity's ultimate defensive system, Project Aegis. Hidden installations across Earth's surface began broadcasting a coordinated electromagnetic pulse that created a stable wormhole in space. Through that wormhole came the TDF Apocalypse, a warship that had been secretly constructed in another galaxy using technology reverse-engineered from ancient alien ruins. The Apocalypse was less a ship than a mobile weapons platform the size of a small moon. Its primary weapon was a reality cannon that could literally rewrite the fundamental forces of physics in localized areas of space. As it emerged from the wormhole, its presence alone caused several Zephyrian ships to simply cease to exist. Warlord Thaxis stared at the tactical display in horror. His massive fleet, the pride of the Zephyrian Empire, was being systematically destroyed by weapons that shouldn't have been possible. Worse, the humans were broadcasting the entire battle across all communication frequencies, ensuring that every Zephyrian in the galaxy could watch their invincible military being humiliated. "Sir," his communication officer reported, his voice shaking, "we're receiving a transmission from the human admiral." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her expression calm despite the devastation around her. "Warlord Thaxis, your fleet is defeated. Your empire's military is broken. You have one final opportunity to end this conflict before we demonstrate the full extent of human capabilities." Thaxis snarled at the screen. "You think your tricks frighten me, human? We still have reserve fleets, entire sectors of military might that you cannot possibly match." Chen's smile was cold. "You're right, Warlord. We can't match them. We can only eliminate them completely. You see, while your fleets were attacking our colonies, our deep space reconnaissance has been mapping every Zephyrian world, every military installation, every population center in your empire." She gestured, and the display filled with tactical information showing the locations of major Zephyrian worlds. "We know where your leaders hide. We know where your families live. We know where every single member of your species calls home." Thaxis felt a chill run down his scaled spine. "You're bluffing. No species could coordinate such an extensive intelligence operation." "We've had 300 years to prepare for this day," Chen replied. 3 centuries of peaceful observation, mapping, and planning for the possibility that someone would force us to abandon our civilized nature. You've given us that excuse." The transmission ended, leaving Thaxis staring at the remnants of his fleet. Around him, the command staff watched in stunned silence as their invincible military was reduced to scrap metal by an enemy they had underestimated completely. For the first time in Zephyrian history, their military faced the possibility of total defeat. And they were beginning to understand that humanity's offer of mercy might be the only thing standing between their civilization and complete annihilation. Humanity's systematic dismantling of the Zephyrian Empire. But Admiral Chen had no intention of simply defeating their military forces. The genocide at New Geneva demanded a response that would ensure such atrocities could never be repeated. Within hours of the Sol System battle, Human fleets began appearing throughout Zephyrian space, using technology that defied their enemies' understanding of faster-than-light travel. These weren't the slow, predictable jump drives that most galactic civilizations used. Instead, humanity deployed quantum fold drives that could move ships instantly across vast distances without the usual energy signatures or navigation delays. The first target was Zephyros Prime itself, the Empire's capital world, and home to nearly 2 billion Zephyrians. The planet's orbital defenses were formidable, with energy shields that could deflect conventional weapons and a fleet of 300 defending warships. None of it mattered. The TDF Retribution materialized directly inside the planet's defensive perimeter, its quantum fold drive bypassing the shield entirely. Admiral Chen's ship wasn't alone. 12 other human vessels appeared simultaneously, surrounding the planet in a perfect sphere formation. On the surface of Zephyros Prime, emergency sirens wailed as the population realized they were under attack. Government officials who had cheered the assault on New Geneva now cowered in underground bunkers, finally, understanding the terror their victims had felt. Admiral Chun broadcast a message to the planet's population, her words transmitted on every frequency and displayed on every communication device. Citizens of Zephyros Prime, I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Force. Your military leaders chose to commit genocide against human civilians. They targeted our children, our elderly, our innocent. They broadcast the executions for entertainment. Now you will experience the consequences of their choices. The planetary defense fleet moved to engage the human ships, confident that their numbers would prevail. What they encountered instead was a demonstration of how far human military technology had advanced beyond galactic norms. The human ships didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, they activated what appeared to be scanning beams that swept across the Zephyrian vessels. Within moments, the enemy ships began experiencing cascading system failures as their own computers turned against them, rewriting their programming and taking control of their weapon systems. One by one, the Zephyrian ships opened fire on each other, their crews helpless to prevent their vessels from attacking their allies. The planetary defense fleet destroyed itself in under an hour while the human ships remained untouched. But Chen wasn't finished. As the last defending ship exploded, she activated a weapon system that had been developed specifically for this moment, the Mirror Protocol. Across the planet's surface, holographic projectors began displaying images from New Geneva. Every Zephyrian citizen found themselves watching the executions, the torture chambers, the systematic murder of human civilians. But these weren't just recordings. They were interactive displays that forced viewers to experience the events from the perspective of the victims. The psychological impact was devastating. Zephyrians who had celebrated their military's victories were forced to confront the reality of what their empire had done. Many couldn't handle the horror and simply shut down mentally. Others began questioning everything they had been told about the war. This is what your leaders called victory. Chen's voice continued over the images. This is the glory they promised you. Every human death at New Geneva was filmed and catalogued. Every act of torture was documented. Your military preserved these recordings as trophies. The displays shifted to show the planning meetings where Zephyrian leaders had discussed the systematic extermination of humanity. Citizens watched in horror as their own government officials debated the most efficient methods for murdering children. We could respond in kind, Chen said, her voice carrying across the planet. We could visit the same horrors upon you that you visited upon us. We have the technology. We have the weapons. We have the justification. The population held its breath, waiting for the extermination to begin. But we are not you, Chen continued. We do not take pleasure in causing suffering. We do not target innocents. However, those responsible for these crimes will face justice. They will answer for what they have done. Across the planet, quantum teleportation beams began targeting specific individuals. Government officials, military commanders, and anyone involved in planning or celebrating the New Geneva genocide found themselves instantly transported to holding cells aboard human ships. The precision was terrifying. The humans knew exactly who had been involved in their crimes, down to individual propaganda officers who had helped spread anti-human hatred. No one responsible escaped, but ordinary citizens were left unharmed. Within hours, the the Zephyrian government had effectively ceased to exist. Every leader, every planner, every enthusiastic supporter of genocide had been captured and removed from the planet. The remaining population was left leaderless and confused, finally, understanding that their supposedly invincible empire was helpless against human retaliation. But Zephyros Prime was only the beginning. Across Zephyrian space, similar operations were taking place simultaneously. Human forces struck 200 worlds in perfect coordination, crippling the Empire's command structure in a single day. The weapons used grew increasingly exotic as humanity revealed technologies that seemed to border on magic. Matter converters that could transform military installations into harmless materials. Temporal stasis fields that froze entire fleets in time. Reality anchors that prevented enemy ships from using faster-than-light travel. On the industrial world of Krothos, now under human protection, Colonel Kim watched the reports coming in from across Zephyrian space. The sheer scope of the operation was staggering. Humanity was dismantling an interstellar empire with surgical precision. "Colonel," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different Zephyrian worlds. They're offering unconditional capitulation." Kim wasn't surprised. Word was spreading throughout Zephyrian space about humanity's true capabilities. The peaceful neighbors who had seemed like easy prey were revealing themselves as perhaps the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. But the most shocking revelation came when human forces reached the Zephyrian research installations where the anti-human weapons had been developed. What they found there went beyond simple war crimes into territory that horrified even battle-hardened human marines. The installations contained not just weapons, but detailed studies of human biology conducted on living prisoners. Zephyrian scientists had systematically tortured hundreds of human captives to test the effectiveness of their weapons. The research notes showed that they had deliberately kept victims alive as long as possible to maximize data collection. When Admiral Chun reviewed the evidence, her carefully controlled anger finally boiled over. She immediately authorized the deployment of humanity's most classified weapon system, Project Ragnarok. Unlike the surgical strikes that had characterized the war so far, Ragnarok was designed for complete obliteration. It was a weapon system that could destroy not just planets, but entire star systems, erasing them so completely that no trace of their existence would remain. The first target was the Zirian system, home to the Zephyrian military research complex where the human prisoners had been tortured. The system contained 3 planets and over 50 million Zephyrian civilians, but she no longer cared about minimizing collateral damage. The Zephyrians wanted to see humanity without moral restraints, she told her staff as she authorized the strike. They've earned the right to see what that actually looks like. The TDF Apocalypse, the massive warship that had emerged during the Battle of Earth, positioned itself at the edge of the Zirian system. Its reality cannon charged with enough power to destabilize the system's star, creating a controlled supernova that would sterilize everything within 3 light years. But before firing, Chun broadcast one final message to the doomed system. To the population of Zirian, you are about to pay the price for your empire's crimes. Your military tortured hundreds of human prisoners in facilities on these worlds. They developed weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering to our children. This is your reckoning. She paused, letting the words sink in. Unlike your military, we do not take pleasure in this. But justice demands payment. You will have 10 minutes to make peace with whatever gods you worship. The countdown began, broadcast throughout Zephyrian space, so that every surviving member of their species could watch what happened to those who committed genocide against humanity. When the reality cannon fired, the results were spectacular and terrible. The star went supernova in a carefully controlled explosion that consumed everything in the system. 3 planets, 50 million lives, and centuries of Zephyrian civilization were erased in a matter of minutes. The psychological impact on the surviving Zephyrian population was immediate and devastating. For the first time in their history, an entire Zephyrian star system had been completely destroyed by an enemy force. The supposedly invincible empire was not just losing, it was being systematically erased from existence. Across Zephyrian space, military units began surrendering en masse rather than face the possibility of similar destruction. planetary governors declared independence from the Empire and begged for human protection. The rigid military hierarchy that had held Zephyrian society together for centuries began collapsing as survival instinct overcame loyalty. On his flagship, now hiding in a nebula at the edge of Zephyrian space, warlord Thaxus watched his empire disintegrate. Half of his military had surrendered. Dozens of worlds had declared neutrality. His own admirals were openly discussing surrender rather than face humanity's wrath. "Sir," his science advisor Corvus reported quietly, "we're receiving intelligence reports from across our territory. The humans aren't just defeating our military. They're systematically identifying and eliminating everyone involved in planning the genocide. They know things about our operations that even we had forgotten." Thaxus studied the tactical displays showing the collapse of his empire. "How is this possible? We barely knew humans existed before we attacked them. How could they know so much about us?" Corvus had been studying captured human technology and had reached a disturbing conclusion. "Sir, I believe the humans have been observing us for much longer than we realized. Their weapons, their tactics, their psychological warfare, everything is specifically designed to counter our advantages. They've been preparing for this conflict for decades, possibly centuries." The warlord felt a chill of recognition. "You're suggesting they planned this? That they wanted us to attack them?" "I'm suggesting they were ready for someone like us," Corvus replied carefully. "A species that would force them to abandon their peaceful nature. They developed these weapons not because they wanted to use them, but because they knew someone would eventually give them no choice." As if summoned by their conversation, a priority communication came through on their secure channels. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her expression calm despite the destruction she had unleashed. "Warlord Thaxus, your empire is finished. Your military is in full retreat. Your worlds are surrendering rather than face the consequences of your crimes. This is your final opportunity to end the suffering of your people." Thaxus snarled at the screen, but his defiance was hollow. "What do you want, human?" "Unconditional surrender," Chen replied. "You will turn yourself and all remaining war criminals over to human justice. You will provide full reparations for the genocide you committed. You will submit to occupation until we are satisfied that your species no longer poses a threat to human civilization." The warlord's pride warred with his survival instinct. "And if I refuse?" Chen's smile was cold. "Then, we will continue demonstrating human capabilities until your species understands that resistance is futile. We have weapons you cannot imagine, warlord." The destruction of Zirion was merely a preview. As if to emphasize her point, long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures throughout human space. Dozens of ships like the Apocalypse were powering up their reality cannons, preparing to erase entire star systems from existence. For the first time in his life, Warlord Thaxus understood what it felt like to be prey. The destruction of Warlord Thaxus's fleet at Earth marked the beginning of the surrender of Warlord Thaxus came 3 days after the destruction of the Zirion system. Faced with the complete collapse of his empire and the threat of systematic extermination, the proud Zephyrian leader finally transmitted his unconditional capitulation to Admiral Chun. The ceremony took place aboard the TDF Retribution in orbit around Zephyros Prime. Thaxus, stripped of his military regalia and bound in quantum restraints that prevented any possibility of escape, stood before a tribunal of human military officers and civilian representatives. Admiral Chun presided over the proceedings, flanked by holographic displays showing the evidence of Zephyrian war crimes. The footage from New Geneva played continuously, not for entertainment, but as a reminder of why they were there. "Warlord Thaxus," Chen began, her voice formal and cold, "you stand accused of genocide, crimes against sentience, the systematic torture and murder of civilian populations, and violations of every recognized law of war. How do you answer these charges?" Thaxus remained silent, his scaled hide dulled by defeat, and the shock of seeing his invincible empire reduced to a handful of refugee ships hiding in deep space. His silence was answer enough. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, now serving as the civilian representative on the tribunal, spoke next. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. Your own communications, your military records, the testimony of survivors. All of it confirms that you planned and executed the systematic extermination of human civilians. She activated a display showing the industrial facilities on Krothos that had been producing anti-human weapons. These installations were designed specifically to maximize human suffering. Your scientists developed weapons that would cause the slowest, most agonizing deaths possible. They tested these weapons on living human prisoners. Thaxis finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We were following our nature. The strong survive. The weak are consumed. This is the law of the universe. Admiral Chin's expression didn't change. And now you've learned what it means to be the weak. Your law of the universe works both ways, Warlord. You chose to be predators. Now you've discovered that there are bigger predators in the galaxy. The trial was largely ceremonial. The evidence was undeniable, and the outcome had been predetermined by Zephyrian actions. What mattered was establishing a legal framework for what came next, the complete restructuring of Zephyrian civilization. The sentence was as comprehensive as it was harsh. Thaxis and his fellow war criminals would spend the remainder of their lives in quantum prisons, experiencing every moment of suffering they had inflicted on their victims through direct neural link. They would live the deaths of every human who had died at New Geneva, feeling each moment of terror and agony as if it were their own. But the Zephyrian Empire itself faced a different fate. Rather than simple destruction, humanity chose transformation. The Zephyrian species will be placed under direct human administration, Chin announced to the assembled representatives of both species. Your military will be disbanded. Your government will be dissolved. Your industrial capacity will be redirected toward peaceful purposes. She paused, studying the defeated Zephyrian officials who had been forced to witness their leader's trial. However, this is not conquest. This is rehabilitation. Humanity has no interest in ruling other species. Our goal is to ensure that the Zephyrian capacity for genocide is permanently eliminated. The process that followed was unlike anything seen in galactic history. Instead of simply occupying Zephyrian worlds, humanity began implementing what they called the Reformation Protocol. It was social engineering on a massive scale, designed to transform an entire civilization's fundamental values. Zephyrian children were removed from their parents and placed in human-run education centers where they learned cooperation instead of dominance, empathy instead of predation. The propaganda that had celebrated strength through violence was replaced with lessons about the benefits of peaceful cooperation. Adult Zephyrians underwent mandatory psychological rehabilitation using the same neural interface technology that was being used to punish the war criminals. But instead of experiencing suffering, they were forced to experience human emotions, compassion, empathy, guilt over their actions. The process was traumatic for a species that had evolved to suppress such feelings, but it was necessary. Colonel Kim, now serving as military governor of Krothos, watched the transformation with mixed emotions. The Zephyrian population that had once celebrated human deaths was slowly learning to feel guilt and shame for their actions. Many couldn't handle the emotional burden and required extensive psychiatric treatment. It's working, she reported to Admiral Chun during one of their regular briefings. The older generation is struggling with the psychological modifications, but they're beginning to understand what they did wrong. The children are adapting more easily. Chin nodded. Any resistance movements? A few scattered groups are trying to maintain the old ways, but they're losing support rapidly. Most Zephyrians have seen what happens to civilizations that oppose human authority. They're more afraid of us than they are loyal to their old culture. The fear was well-founded. News of humanity's response to Zephyrian aggression had spread throughout the galaxy, and other species were taking notice. The peaceful humans who had been considered potential victims were revealed as perhaps the most dangerous military force in known space. Diplomatic missions from dozens of civilizations arrived at Earth, seeking to establish formal treaties and ensure they would never find themselves in the Zephyrians' position. The galactic balance of power had shifted overnight, with humanity at its center. But the transformation went beyond simple military dominance. Human scientists began sharing their advanced technologies with reformed Zephyrian researchers, showing them how to use their industrial capacity for construction instead of destruction. Medical teams helped treat the psychological trauma that the rehabilitation process had caused. Dr. Reeves, the director of Project Chimera, found herself working with former Zephyrian weapons designers to convert their knowledge toward peaceful purposes. The same scientists who had developed torture devices were now helping to create medical equipment that could ease suffering. "It's remarkable," she told Admiral Chun during a visit to the research station orbiting Zephyros Prime. "Once you remove their cultural conditioning toward violence, many of these scientists are actually quite brilliant. They're making breakthroughs in fields we hadn't even considered." Chun studied the progress reports with satisfaction. Good. The goal was never to destroy the Zephyrian species. The goal was to eliminate their capacity for genocide. If they can be reformed into productive members of galactic civilization, then justice has been served. The process took years, but gradually the Zephyrian Empire was transformed into something unrecognizable from its former self. Military installations became research centers. Weapons factories became medical facilities. The warrior culture that had dominated Zephyrian thinking for millennia was replaced with a cooperative society focused on peaceful development. Most importantly, the new Zephyrian education system included mandatory courses on the consequences of genocide. Every Zephyrian child learned about New Geneva, about the human civilians who had died, about the war crimes their species had committed. The lessons were reinforced with the same neural interface technology that had been used in the rehabilitation process. 5 years after Thaxus's surrender, Admiral Chin stood in the same chambers where the Terran Defense Council had first authorized Operation Nemesis. The war was over, but the work of building a lasting peace continued. "Admiral," Representative Watanabe said, his voice heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed, "do you ever regret what we became during this war? The weapons we used, the fear we instilled, the way we transformed from explorers into exterminators?" Chin considered the question carefully. "Jean, we didn't transform into exterminators. We revealed capabilities we had always possessed but hoped never to use. The difference is crucial." She activated a display showing the current status of former Zephyrian worlds. Where once there had been military installations and weapons factories, there were now universities and medical centers. Where once there had been propaganda broadcasts celebrating violence, there were now cultural exchanges between species. "The Zephyrians forced us to become something we never wanted to be," Chun continued. "But we chose to become something better afterward. We could have simply destroyed them. Instead, we saved them from themselves." Representative Torres, who had lost family in the initial attacks, spoke up. "The galaxy certainly sees us differently now. Every species in known space wants defensive pacts with humanity. They're all terrified of ending up like the Zephyrians." "Good," Chin replied without hesitation. "Fear of consequences prevents wars better than appeals to morality. The Zephyrians thought they could commit genocide because they believed humans were too weak to stop them. Now every potential aggressor knows what happens when humanity is forced to abandon its peaceful nature." Dr. Hoffman, now nearing retirement, raised a final concern. "But what about our own humanity? What about the values we claim to defend? Did we lose them in the process of saving them?" Chin smiled for the first time in the meeting. "Elizabeth, walk through any former Zephyrian city. You'll see human teachers working with Zephyrian children. You'll see human doctors treating former enemy soldiers. You'll see human engineers helping to rebuild the worlds their own weapons damaged." She gestured to reports from across the reformed empire. "We didn't lose our humanity. We proved that sometimes the most humane thing you can do is show monsters why they should fear being monsters. The Zephyrians wanted to see humans without moral restraints. What they got was humans who chose to restrain themselves after demonstrating what unrestricted human capability could accomplish. The transformation was complete, but its effects rippled across the galaxy for decades. The lesson was clear: attack human civilians at your peril. Humanity had shown that their peaceful nature was a choice, not a limitation, and they were prepared to make different choices when faced with genocide. The galaxy was a more peaceful place because of it. Potential aggressors thought twice before targeting innocents. Diplomatic solutions became more attractive than military ones. And somewhere in the depths of space, former Zephyrian war criminals served their eternal sentences, experiencing every moment of suffering they had caused while the species they had tried to exterminate worked to heal the wounds of war. The humans had kept their promise. They had shown the Zephyrians what they were capable of when pushed too far. And, in doing so, They had ensured that no other species would make the same mistake. Justice had been served. Humanity had paid them back in full.